So, two conceptions of sacrifice. So what I'll do is I'll start off with a story of William Wallace and then talk a little bit about the importance of sacrifice and how that has changed over, I suppose, thousands of years. William Wallace was offered mercy if he had just submitted to the King of England. The king's wife came to him and said, if you submit yourself, the king will give you mercy, or you'll be killed. In response, William said, every man dies, but not every man lives. The writer of the story, Randall Wallace, said that he was thinking about Jesus' execution when he wrote those lines. Every man dies, but not every man lives. He also said he thought about Jesus on the cross at Golgotha. It would be hard to look at the man hanging on the cross and think, he is the victor in this picture. But if you look long enough, he just might be. So there are two conceptions of sacrifice to further one's being in the world. The first is to sacrifice for the benefit of oneself, and the second is to sacrifice oneself for the benefit of others. On the extreme, the first conception, sacrificing others, entails brutality and manipulation. Maltreating others may work as long as they're weaker, but there always comes a time when a stronger opponent comes along, or a group of opponents who won't have any of the brutality or manipulation, who easily overthrow the authority. Brutality, violence, and manipulation necessarily make one's existence tentative. When one operates with force, opposing forces can consolidate and compact to meet that force. So there are numerous examples of this in physics, chemistry, psychology, politics, economics that illustrate opposing forces. In social psychology, actually, as I'm talking about that, Dostoevsky, I think, has a great way of talking about opposing forces and how opposing forces develop spontaneously. But anyway, in social psychology, alpha animals that use minimal force and facilitate group flourishing usually last longer as alphas. Animals that use violence find that playmates are scarce and opposing forces multiply. People who sow violence, like Gideon's son, Abimelech in the book of Judges, reap violence. While using force, sacrificing others can be productive, this is not the ideal way to flourish as an individual or collective. The second conception of flourishing is to offer oneself. And I suppose it begs the question, what's the best way to make a sacrifice? So, it is to offer oneself up, like Jesus or William Wallace. I don't think that sacrifice excludes martyrdom. But also I think that Romans 12 sets out the ideal. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Sacrifice is to live to be transformed in our thinking and being. Romans 11, the chapter just before that, explains that the Lord, through the Redeemer, his Son, Jesus, has given us mercy for our disobedience. In view of this great mercy, 12, we should be living to be transformed by mercy. The scripture goes on to say that if we live this way, we will know what his good, pleasing, and perfect will is. We are transformed by our sacrifice into the ideal. We flourish and offer this flourishing to others by our model, our speech, our actions, our good works, showing mercy, kindness, and forgiveness. So there have frequently been times throughout history where Jews and Christians have been martyred, and it's happening right now in Egypt and Nigeria most recently. And I thank God regularly for this, for those who have given up their lives, who refuse to recant their faith in Jesus. We don't face opposition in our context. We enjoy relative safety from those who might target our lives and livelihoods. Even so, even if we don't face persecution, we can still give our lives, to offer our lives to be transformed by God's mercy, to increasingly discover his good, pleasing, and perfect will. So, in a context like ours, actually, what happens is that faithlessness is called being true to oneself. And I think sacrifice, in part, in our context, means that we're called to faithfulness, being true to family, friends, and neighbors. Again, the baseline for our relationships has been characterized by self-gratification by any means. In fundamental ways, self-gratification has utility, but it tends to be short-lived and empty because our needs can get in the way of the needs of others who may be more powerful or more willing to employ forceful means. We're called to faithfulness in our families, in our church communities, in our places of study and work. This transforming sacrifice has always been the process where society has moved from the chaotic to the ideal, from the desert wilderness to the walled garden. So now two scenarios are relevant here. And the first goes back to Abraham in the Old Testament, and the second has to do with rearing children, and boys in particular. First, sacrificing children was pretty normal in Abraham's context. Sacrificing his first son would have been completely acceptable. Sacrificing babies is not superstitious, and simultaneously is not without pragmatic utility. The resources that one could plow into one's progeny could be plowed into crops and livestock, or today into comfort and wealth-generating activities. Those resources are not insignificant. God put a stop to Abraham's sacrifice, and God himself provided the sacrifice, foreshadowing the ultimate sacrifice that he would make for the salvation of the entire world. Sons who are molded by good fathers, fathers who sacrificed for the good of their sons, on the whole, are less, likely to have adverse childhood experiences and are protected from outcomes like interactions with law enforcement later on. Not only does having a loving father protect him from adverse outcomes, but there are a range of healthy outcomes, not limited to meaningful relationships and mutual faithfulness. So here is the clincher. Yes, God stopped human sacrifice with Abram. And then 3,000 years later, God sacrificed his son, the God-man, to absolve our sin and ensure our flourishing. And we shouldn't take this for granted. This is the very thing that conquers the world, transforms the world. I'm going to read from this week's reading, 1 John chapter 5. Everyone who believes that Jesus is the Christ has been born of God, and everyone who loves the parent loves the child. By this we know that we love the children of God, when we love God and obey his commandments. For the love of God is this, that we obey his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. For whatever is born of God conquers the world. And this is the victory that conquers the world, our faith. Who is it that conquers the world? But the one who believes that Jesus is the Son of God. Father, thank you that you sent your son Jesus as the final sacrifice. Thank you for our fathers, and particularly today we want to thank you for our mothers who have lived sacrificially. Lead us to emulate their faith in your son Jesus.